Hello everyone! I am Alice of KHR Arts and Cloud Orchid Publishing, and today I am going to talk about the true cost and value of doing a convention as an author. So this video is from the perspective and expectation that you as an author are going to sign up for a convention to do both panels and also have a booth as a vendor to sell your books. Where do we start with this? Well, first we have to determine what is the cost of attending a typical convention like this in order to then be able to determine what's the overall value of attending that convention. So for the purpose of this, I am going to use the example of WindyCon. WindyCon is a bit more of a mid-sized convention. It is not a mega convention like ACEN or DragonCon or Gen Con or anything like that, because I feel like that's the more extreme example of attending a convention, and honestly it takes a certain level of financial capability, as well as in order to get the value of being a part of those conventions, you really need to reach a certain level as an author. You really need to have a good number of books published that you can have available to sell in order to make being a part of a convention like that worth it. So for the purpose of this, we're going to talk about a mid-level sized convention like WindyCon, because that is going to be a far more realistic example for authors starting out in order to give you the idea of cost and value of a convention. The reason why we're not starting off with like a small sized event is because there are so many small sized events that are anywhere from absolutely 100% free, you don't have to pay anything to be a part of them, to it's literally like $25 to attend, just the cheapest of the cheap. And at that point with that, I really think the cost versus value should be obvious to you, that if it's anywhere from free to like $25, yes, do that event. You really don't have anything to lose in that case. And it's just not a comparable thing that I can use as an example, because it's literally like, for the cost of going out to dinner, you can attend a convention and sell your books. I don't know how to not argue, yes, it's valuable to do that. So I digress. Mid-level convention, WindyCon. What are the costs associated with working as both a panelist and a vendor attending WindyCon? So the four main things that you're going to have to pay for are your badge fee, your table fee, your hotel cost, and your book inventory. And this is a thing at some conventions where some of them have it where if you apply to be a vendor, they do roll your badge fee into the table fee, so it's all one fee. But there are some events that are like WindyCon where they are two separate fees. So that is important to keep in mind, that this is more money that you're going to have to shell out in order to attend. So for WindyCon, the badge fee is typically about $45 per person. And this is if you are paying for it ahead of time. So you're signing up and paying for it ahead of time rather than at the actual convention. And as a word of advice, if you are planning on attending a convention as a panelist and as a vendor, you're going to have to sign up and do that prior to the convention. You cannot just buy a door badge. That's not how signing up as a vendor works. So this is something you're going to have to save up for and make sure you have in advance. And then the table fee completely depends on how big of a space that you want to have. It's anywhere from one table to two tables to having an entire 10 by 10 square booth space. And obviously, that is the sliding scale of attending the convention. I personally typically go for the two-table setup because I attend with my partner Neil, who is also an author and brings his own books to sell, so we share the space. And being able to essentially have one table for me and one table for him, although our setup is typically more like 2/3 of the table for me and 1/3 of the table for him, simply because I just have so many more things to put on the table. But whatever you want to work out with, if you are sharing a booth, make sure that everyone feels the amount of space they're given is equitable. And that's another thing, is equal does not necessarily mean equitable. Just because something is equal doesn't necessarily mean that everybody is feeling that they're getting the value out of it for being equitable. That's a whole other discussion though. So for that cost, it's typically about $150 to $200 for a two-table booth space. Obviously, a one table is less than that, and a 10 by 10 is significantly more than that. I can look that up later and put the stats below for y'all so that y'all can have that comparison of how the price fluctuates depending on the size of the space that you decide to pay for. Now, again, determining what size of space that you need is really important because you want to make sure that you're getting the most bang for your buck, but you also want to make sure that your space is serving you. So this means don't just go with the cheapest option of a single table if your table is going to be absolutely overcrowded with way too much stuff, because then that makes it really hard for potential buyers to navigate, as well as they might feel intimidated and not want to pick stuff up because maybe it's placed really precariously or it's really difficult to pick things up because it's just so crowded. So keep that in mind and make sure that you are getting the space that is appropriate for the amount of product that you have to display. A thing that I often do if I'm doing a convention that I haven't done before in a space I'm unfamiliar with is that I have my own tables and I will actually do a dry run test at home and set up my tables similar to how I think that the setup is going to be at the convention, and then figure out how I want to display stuff beforehand so that I'm better prepared for what exactly do I want for my setup when I actually attend the convention. And you can do that too with kind of figuring out how much space do I really need for my products. You can even just do that like on your floor and then take out a measuring tape and be like, okay, how much space is this exactly that I'm going to take up and how many tables do I really think this requires? Having an actual 10 by 10 booth is not something that I recommend for an author. It's usually taken up by the vendors that are selling like things. So like especially the vendors that sell like Ren Fair clothes or sell like a lot of like toys and just arts and crafts and like actual physical like things as opposed to books. But if you are like a lot of my author friends who like to go together at conventions, so like anywhere from 3 to like 6 of them, getting a 10 by 10 space might make more sense for that, because then you have that entire large space to split up amongst that many people. So it all depends on, are you doing this by yourself? Are you doing this with other people? How much space does everybody need? All of that determines the cost versus value for this portion of signing up for a convention. The next portion is deciding whether or not you need to book a hotel room, which again is something that you really want to make sure you do in advance, because a lot of conventions will have hotel blocks available. And what this means is that the convention works together with the hotel in order to get a cheaper price for attendees who reserve a hotel room in advance through the convention. So you get a cheaper price, and it also guarantees that the hotel is going to have X number of rooms booked for the convention, which also encourages them to want to host that convention again in the future. So it's definitely something that helps support the convention overall and ensures that it's going to still be a convention in years to come. It also just makes your life easier, having your space set up in your hotel room so that all you have to do is get dressed and then head downstairs to wherever it is that the vendor room is set up, rather than having to put all your crap in the car and then drive from wherever your house is to where the convention is. If it's local, where it's nearby, it might be worth it for you. I have done that in the past, especially back when I did not have the finances that I do now, which honestly is really not saying much of anything. My finances are not great, but they are good enough where I can save up enough money in advance to be able to get a hotel room now. Whereas previously I was really financially struggling, and I did used to do that trek of driving back and forth to and from the convention. And let me tell y'all, it is horrible. Like, if you can afford it, get a hotel room. Like, do not do that to yourself. You're going to be so incredibly tired. It's just an absolute pain, especially if you're a person like me where you go in full cosplay. That means you have to get up even earlier to put on your makeup and get in full costume and then get in your car and drive like that to the convention, and making sure that you're there early enough for doors open. And then you're probably going to want to stay past the vendor hall being closed for the day and go to programming and go to parties and stuff, and having to determine all that versus how far do you have to drive home and how much sleep do you need to get and all of that. Just get a hotel room. It just makes it so much easier. And so on average, a typical weekend convention, this means from Friday to Sunday, I have found that it costs usually about anywhere from $350 to $500 for the whole weekend, depending on where the convention is, like specifically what hotel. So that determines price. But I found with WindyCon, it's usually more in like the $350 range for the weekend. And yeah, that is a big chunk of money, especially when you put that against the badge fee and the table fee. And we're just getting started, y'all, with all of the money you're going to need to do a convention. It adds up quick. Yeah, the hotel is probably the biggest expense on your docket for doing a convention, but it is going to make your life so much easier. And trust me, conventions are hard enough. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. The last item that is the most important item that you're going to need to pay for in order to attend a convention is your book inventory. So if you're like me, where you have a con circuit, where you have a schedule of conventions that you do every year, and in addition to that, maybe adding or subtracting different conventions outside of your regular circuit, you're going to have a revolving book inventory. So this means that I don't typically just like magically sell out of every single book that I take with me to a convention. So when I go home, I have inventory left over and I only have to buy whatever amount of inventory I sold in order to replenish it and then just keep the ball rolling for the next convention. But if you're just starting out and you've never done a convention before, that means that you're going to have to foot the cost of having a total book inventory order. So going from 0 to 60 essentially. And that's kind of the question mark here, is that is a cost that you have to determine on your own. This is obviously, one of those algebra equations where it's how many books do you have published that you want to sell at this event? How much do they cost wholesale? How much is shipping going to cost? And then based on all of that, you're going to have to figure out what you're going to price them at to sell at the convention so that you can recoup everything, all of the cost that you're about to incur for doing this convention. So figuring all that out. So, question mark on the price of whatever your book inventory is. On average, I spend anywhere from $0 to about $100 on inventory per convention, depending on how many books I sold at the previous convention and that I need for the next convention. And that also determines if I feel that I need to up my book inventory. So typically for conventions, for my book inventory, I have between 5 and 10 copies of each book to sell at conventions. Now that may not sound like a lot, but when you have this many titles, that is 5 to 10 times 30 titles. That is a lot of books, y'all. Like a lot. That is literally 5 plastic tote bins, like the big storage tote bins, full to the brim of books. So I just need y'all to also recognize that, because that's something I talk about in some of my other videos, is the idea of how are you going to transport all this crap to the convention? Do you have a vehicle that can transport all of the stuff that you need to bring? And that's why I have a Jeep that has a huge amount of storage capacity in it so that I can transport that many books. That is a lot of books to take with you. So keep that in mind when you're ordering inventory, that there's only so many books that you can physically transport. There's only so many books you can fit on your table. And also be mindful of how big is this convention? What is the average attendance count for this convention? If it's only going to be anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 attendees, which is about where WindyCon is, you do not need to order 100 copies of all your books. That's just completely unreasonable, and don't do that, because you're going to have like a bazillion copies of your books left over that are not going to sell. It's very rare for an author to just magnificently sell out of 100 books at a convention like that, especially when they're first starting out and nobody knows who you are. So be reasonable about how many books you're bringing for all of those logistical reasons. So the question mark of how much your book inventory is, for the sake of this, we'll put 50 for the middle of the road number for what I would typically have for a convention. The next portion is also kind of a question mark, because it depends on what exactly all you need to go out and buy in order to do a convention. So if you're an experienced person like me, there probably isn't going to be a whole lot that you're going to need to buy. Whereas if you're just starting out, you're going to have to start at ground zero and buy all of the things. So first things first, I've talked about this in some of my other videos, that working as an author at conventions, you want to build up. You don't need the whole Taj Mahal right off the bat. It's not necessary. Definitely pace yourself and build yourself up over time. It's just financially easier, and also it's logistically easier on the learning curve of what all you're going to need, as well as each author's individual needs for what they need their booth setup to be is just that, individual needs. So what works for one author might not work for you. So knowing all of that in advance, and you're not investing tons and tons of money on stuff you find that you just don't need or it doesn't work for you, make sure you keep all of this in mind. And on top of that, also doing that dry run of experimenting with what exactly do you need for your booth setup is going to really help you determine these things. So the most basic things that you're going to need for working as an author, attending conventions as a vendor, is you're going to need tables, chairs, tablecloths, and some sort of ability to display your books. Those are the most basic things that you just absolutely need. Research in advance to see if the convention does provide tables and chairs as a part of your table fee. Now, I know this sounds very much like Captain Obvious, like, well, I'm paying a table fee, like, aren't they going to provide me with tables and chairs to put in the space that I bought? Not necessarily, unfortunately. I've seen some people learn this the hard way, in that make sure that you absolutely read the contract that you're signing and paying for to be a vendor, and that you understand whether or not you are going to be provided with tables and chairs, and most importantly, how many. Because there are some conventions where they will provide them for you, but you can also pay extra to have more. So if you need more chairs, or for whatever reason you need more tables or whatever, they're happy to provide those for you at a cost. There are other conventions where they provide nothing at all. They're just like, here's your space, do whatever. They'll oftentimes actually put tape on the floor to show you, this is your box, do whatever in your box. And then I've seen people just stand there and they're like, where's my table? And they're like, you're supposed to bring your own. And they're like, just shell-shocked. Don't be that person, because it sucks. And then you have to go make an emergency trip to Target or Walmart or whatever, and you're just going to have a very bad time. Making sure that you understand the conventions you're signing up for. Do they provide these things? Do you need to bring your own? And in that case, you need to invest in buying your own so that you have a place to put your stuff, so that you don't just look like a yard sale on the floor. But yeah, so that's a cost that you might have to invest in depending on the convention and what your future plans are. And then a tablecloth. So this is a 100% must. I know that there are some conventions where they will provide tablecloths for you. Some of them are the really nice cloth ones, whereas some of the other ones are the really crappy, like plasticky ones. Regardless, invest in your own tablecloth. Even if it's just the super cheap, plain black ones, don't get the crappy plasticky ones. Invest in the nicer cloth ones. Even if they're not the best quality, the cloth ones just will look better. They work better. They're more reusable. The plastic ones rip and tear, and they're just a nightmare to deal with, and static, and just don't use them. Invest in, at the very least, very basic, nice black tablecloths, or whatever color you like. There are a lot of different colors that are cheap. But eventually you do want to invest in tablecloths that have a little more pizzazz, that have more individualism with them, that help you with your branding in order to make your booth more recognizable from across the room. But in any case, make sure that you invest in your own tablecloth, and to put that on the table, either over the tablecloth that they provide, or take off the tablecloth they provide and just put yours on. Both for branding purposes, as well as you don't know if these have been reused, if they're ripped, if they're stained, or whatever. Just make sure that you have your own tablecloths, just for peace of mind, as well as it's just going to make your space look more professional right off the bat. And tablecloths are cheap. They're like anywhere from $5 to $10 a piece. So if you're getting, a 1 table or 2 table setup, that's only like a $5 to $10 investment. It's really not that much. So we'll add on that number over here, because that's definitely a requirement. The next thing that you need is something to be able to display your books. So this can be a variety of things. This is where you can get really creative with your setup in how you want to display your books. The beginners sort of setup, the most simple utilitarian way to display your books, is that you can get them on Amazon, or you can get them at craft stores like Michael's. I've seen them before at places like Target. I'm sure maybe Walmart has them. Whatever is, they are the little easel sort of display where it opens up like a book, and it has the cute little like curly cues to hold the pages in place and all that, and it opens and closes. It looks like kind of like a little triangle, basically. I'll put a picture here so that y'all know what I'm talking about, because they're kind of hard to describe. But these little display doohickeys, these are what most people use, and myself included, to display their books. You can get really cheap plastic ones for only like a couple bucks, or you can invest in nicer metal or wooden ones. I personally have wooden ones, and they cost about $10 a piece. And so ideally, you want to have at least one of these little display doohickeys per book that you have, as in per book title. And the basic setup that a lot of people will do is that they'll have stacks of their books available on the table for people to pick up, but then they'll have one copy of each book on these cute little displays in front of the stack, or sometimes even on top of the stack, so that you can see it. Again, branding and visibility. See the book from across the room. Have the title showing so that people, bam, can see it sitting up. You can see it just walking past, get a feel for what's available on the table. So some sort of book display like that. If you're like me, where you have a lot of titles and you really need to make sure that you are best utilizing your space to have the most books on your space as possible, is there are also these really cool display racks. And I will show a picture of that over here so you know what I'm talking about. And these are displays where they have multi-tiers, and you can usually fit like about 3 to 4 books across on each tier. So you can fit a lot of books on these. These are really common for booths that feature multiple authors, or feature authors that are like me and have a lot of titles. So they're really useful as well. So depending on how many titles you have and what kind of space you're working with, one of these two sort of styles, or even a mix of the two styles, is what you're going to want to be going for at the very baseline. You can get far more creative with your booth setup and get very fancy display items, and even get decorative things that are just there to make your booth pretty. There's just so much that you can do with your booth setup, especially for branding and recognizability and visibility. Just so much. Just have fun with it. But at the same time, make sure that you understand all that extra fun, cool, creative stuff is going to cost you. And that's why I say make sure you build up your booth over time. Start off with the utilitarian aspect of what you actually need, and then go from there and get creative from there once you get a feel for what it's like having a booth and setting up the booth and stuff like that, and start seeing, what do other people do? What are some ideas for things that you want to do with your booth? Stuff like that. Invest in it over time. Build it over time. Don't just go bananas all at once, because you don't necessarily know if it's going to work or not, and then you're potentially going to waste a lot of your money buying a whole bunch of stuff that you just don't need. So the next item that's a nice to have, it's a thing you really should have, but especially if you're first starting out, and I know this number down here is getting really big and really scary, so it might be a thing maybe you get next convention or a few conventions from now, but the next thing that's really important that you want to invest in is signage. So that means getting like a banner that you put on the front of your booth, that you get those pop-up banners, that you get one of those big displays that goes over the top of your booth. Whatever the case may be, signage is really important. Again, you want to capture people's attention. You want it to be easy to see your booth from across the room, and for them to, at a glance, see what your booth is all about. I currently have 2 different booth banners, the pop-up ones that I utilize for my booth, as well as I actually do have a horizontal banner for hanging off the front of my booth. And this is one of those learning experiences with investing in things, is that I don't think I ordered the right kind of banner, and I haven't been able to properly figure out how to hang it on my booth. And I've kind of gone back to the drawing board with, I don't really know what to do with it right now, and I don't really know where I want to go at present with horizontal signage like that, whether it's overhead or on the front of my booth. That's a thing I'm currently figuring out, and unfortunately I wasted money on this particular banner that just doesn't work for me. And that's the other thing, is stuff like that is going to happen, and why I say build up over time. Buy things like one at a time so you can see how it works out, because it might not work for you, or it might not work the way you expected it to. So that's a big part of it. And signage is also a big thing that you don't want to necessarily invest in right off the bat, because as you establish your brand, it might change. The way that my booth was set up and my brand was set up when I first started doing this back in 2018 is so different than the way it is now in 2023. And I feel like now I've really hit my stride as an author and my brand. And of course, it's going to continue to change in the future. But for now, I really feel like, yeah, this is where my brand is, and this is where I can expect it to be for several more years at the very least. And so making sure you also have your brand more established so that you know what exactly you would want for your signage. Like, what is your brand? What do you want people to recognize you as? What colors do you want associated with your brand? What kind of imagery do you want associated with your brand? All of that is stuff you're going to have to figure out. And also going to conventions and seeing what other people do is going to help you to figure that out for yourself too. So like I said, don't just run out to the store and buy all sorts of things right off the bat, because you'd be surprised at how much stuff you're going to end up regretting spending money on and adding to this overall bottom line cost. The next expense that I'm going to talk about is another one of those things that seems like Captain Obvious, but it's a really easy expense to forget about in all of the hullabaloo of planning for a convention: food. This is something that can add up really fast, especially if you're not smart about it and you don't plan in advance. And it's also a complicated thing because if you're working as both a vendor and a panelist, that means you're going to be really busy throughout the day, and you're not going to have the capability of just stepping away for like an hour or more to go somewhere to go get food, whether it's drive out to a fast food place to pick food up or go to a restaurant and sit down and eat. You're not going to have the time to do that. So planning ahead for what exactly are you going to do for food, especially if you're staying at the hotel for the entire weekend, you need to make sure that you plan out basically your meal plan for the weekend so that you don't spend more money than you have to. There are conventions like WindyCon where they do have both a green room and a con suite, and that'll really help you with your food cost. Now, what those are is the con suite is open to everyone who's at the convention. That means that anybody who has a convention badge, whether you're just an attendee or you're a panelist or you're a vendor, can go in and get some free food. And this can be anywhere from just coffee and water and snacks to full-on actual meals, depending on the size of the convention and what they offer. WindyCon is one of those where they offer snacks and real food. And that's for the entire weekend for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They do all of the above. The green room is something that is specific to WindyCon, and not all conventions do this, but they have a separate area that is just for people who are vendors and panelists, where they can go and, again, get snacks and real food, but it's better quality stuff than what's in the con suite. And depending on your personal preference, you might like whatever they're offering in the con suite more than the green room. It's all up to personal preference, but typically the con suite is kind of cattle call food for the masses, whereas the green room, because they're going to be feeding fewer people, the meals have a little more care put into them, more ingredients, more fun available options, things like that. So there are free options available at a lot of conventions. Make sure that you also read up on that. Is there a green room available? Is there a con suite available? That will really help cut down on your food costs. That can make your food costs zero, honestly, if you play it smart. But don't expect it, because they might be serving something that you don't like, or if you have dietary restrictions that you can't eat. So make sure that you come prepared so that you don't run into that problem and end up spending money that you don't have or you didn't plan on spending, or end up not eating, which is even worse. So make sure that in advance, and this is just good for also being at a booth too, because you're not necessarily going to have time when you want to, when you're hungry, to go to the con suite or the green room. You're going to be busy at your booth or busy at panels. So make sure that in advance you buy snacks for yourself that you can comfortably eat at your booth. What this means is make sure that you're buying snacks that are easy to eat, that don't smell, and don't make a mess. And these things are important because you also have to be mindful of the people around you at the other booths, and also in terms of you don't want to deter people from coming to your booth. You don't want to eat something smelly because it's going to make your booth mates miserable. And also it's going to make people not want to come to your booth because nobody wants to go to the smelly booth. So like, for instance, don't pack egg salad, don't pack tuna sandwiches, don't pack smelly things. Go with things that don't really smell, like fruits or vegetables. Go with simple things like potato chips, but don't buy things like Cheetos that are going to make your fingers all orange and gross, because that'll get all over everything and you don't want to deal with that. So again, with the messy, don't bring things that require utensils to eat. Eat things that are easy finger foods, and also things that are easy to put away at a moment's notice. So a lot of times being at a booth means that you have to put a few mouthfuls in your mouth and chew real fast and put it away, and then somebody's going to come by your booth and start talking to you. So make sure that it's food that's easy to deal with in that respect. And also know what restaurants are available that are close by to the convention as well. If for whatever reason they don't have a green room or con suite, or for whatever reason you don't want the food at the con suite or the green room, find out what's available around you and figure out what is the best cost for you, whether you just want to get something quick from like a fast food place, or maybe you're doing a networking thing and the group of you are like, hey, let's all go to a sit-down restaurant together so that we can continue having this conversation that we're all having. Figuring out what's around you will help you to better plan ahead for that kind of stuff. Personally, at conventions that don't offer a con suite or a green room, I utilize delivery apps like Uber Eats or DoorDash or Postmates or whatever, or Grubhub. All of those are also really good options too. That way that you can look through, it'll show you everything that's close by to you. It'll show you stuff that's a good deal. And on top of it, the food comes to you. So you, depending on what the convention requires, because some of them you're not allowed in the vendor hall without a badge. So you might have to go out to meet the delivery person at the door of the vendor hall, or you might even have to go all the way outside the hotel to the hotel entrance to meet the delivery person. But all of that is still better than having to stop what you're doing, get in your car, go drive to somewhere, go get the food, drive all the way back, blah, 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 like all of that. It's, you can sit there and wait until they're like, hey, I'm outside with your food, and then just, all of 2 minutes, run out there and grab your stuff and come back. I've done that for several conventions. Pro tip, and I talk about this in my latest video about working conventions, get utensils. Make sure that you have, whether it's reusable utensils or disposable utensils, make sure you have those on hand as part of what you pack for the convention. I made the mistake once of ordering food through a delivery app, and then the food did not come with utensils to eat it with, and it was like a rice bowl. So it was something that just, you can't eat with your hands. It's just not feasible, and so it was miserable, and I had to do a whole bunch of shenanigans just to get a fork. It was so stupid. So pro tip there, make sure that you bring emergency silverware just in case, because you never know what shenanigans can unfold. Conventions be crazy sometimes. So yeah, having snacks available that you can bring for yourself, even, bringing your own food that maybe you eat later in the hotel room. If the hotel room has a microwave you can utilize, stuff like that, that can cut down on your food cost. If there's free food available through con suite or green room, that'll help cut down on your cost. But at the end of the day, you do need to make sure you have some sort of food budget, just in case insert disaster happens here and you need to go and get food from somewhere else. Pro tip, unless you're really willing to spend the money, or unless there is some important networking event that is happening and you can't avoid this, don't eat at the restaurants that are inside of the hotel. Starbucks doesn't count, because Starbucks in hotels cost the same amount as Starbucks everywhere else. That doesn't count. I'm talking about the sit-down restaurants at hotels. They are incredibly expensive. And if you are trying to do this on a budget, that is the last thing that you want to do. If you want to, for whatever reason, do a sit-down restaurant, go to a restaurant that is somewhere not in the hotel. Go to a restaurant that's nearby. I guarantee you it's going to be far less expensive than a restaurant in the actual hotel. They do charge more for the convenience of the restaurant being inside of the hotel. So keep that in mind when thinking about where you want to get food from. Avoid eating at an actual hotel, like at all costs, unless you can afford that and you just don't care, or there's some sort of special networking event thing going on and that adds value as opposed to the cost of eating at a more expensive restaurant like that. Okay, so now we have our number down here, which I'm sure by now y'all are like, oh my God, that is so much money. And like I said, there are small conventions and events that are anywhere from free to like a ridiculously low amount of money. You don't necessarily have to even do mid-level conventions just starting out. You can start off doing just the free and really cheap small events. That's totally an option. I did tons of them when I was first starting out, and I still do some of them to this day. You just have to see what is worth your time doing, because just because a convention is free doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be worth your time. So figuring that out too is also part of this cost value. But don't let this number scare you. This is for making sure that you're like, okay, I'm an established author. I have books that I legitimately have that I can sell. And even if you don't necessarily make your money back, that you're going to get a lot of value out of this convention. So that's first things first. Do not have the expectation that you're necessarily going to make this money back. This is an upfront investment. So keep that in mind. If you're going to do this kind of convention, do not go in with the expectation that you're going to make this money back. So if you're like going to not pay rent in order to afford this, don't do that. Don't do something like that. This is playing with money that you don't have. Make sure this is money that you have that you're willing to spend and potentially not see again in order to do this. So that's number one with cost. The second thing with determining value is that there is more to the value than just selling your books for a profit. Well, yes, at the end of the day, that is what we are all trying to do. We're all trying to make a living as authors, is selling our books for profit. That's just called having a business 101. There are other things that are valuable about attending conventions, because honestly, if there weren't other things that were valuable about attending conventions, we wouldn't do them. We'd all just sit at home in our dark little goblin caves and continue writing stuff and just selling our books online and just not caring about this. The other values that you can get out of attending conventions like this and selling your books in person is, one, selling your books in person means that you are directly in person connecting with your audience. You are making that relationship with your readers. You are gaining fans of your books. And this is so incredibly valuable, because one of the valuable components of being able to build your brand and being able to establish yourself as an author is building that audience. And if you can have a face-to-face relationship with your readers like that, they are more likely to be return customers, where if you have a new book out, they'll come and find you and buy it. And also, they'll tell their friends, and then their friends will come and buy your books from you. And it just kind of grassroots from there. That is a big value in doing these conventions that directly benefit you monetarily. Secondary values that you can get out of this that are not necessarily monetary, but will come back and in the long run help you in a monetary sense, is establishing your brand, in that these people might not buy your books today at the convention. They might not buy your books online the week after the convention, but I have encountered where 2 or 3 conventions later, they keep seeing me at these conventions and they start recognizing me and they're like, hey, I keep seeing you around here. Your stuff looks really interesting. Why don't you tell me about it? Having that kind of memorability where people remember you and they keep seeing you and they're like, you know what? I keep seeing this person. I should see what they're all about. That is valuable, because then eventually you can turn just a random person at a convention into a reader and possibly even a fan. That is also a big part of why it's important to participate on panels, because you can get yourself in front of more people and get them excited about what you're all about as an author. And then they're like, wow, I really liked what you talked about on that panel. I'm really excited to learn more about your books. I'm going to follow you back to your booth and I'm going to look at your books. That happens. Absolutely worth it. And then, of course, there's the networking opportunities. And so this is all about furthering your career as an author. So at a lot of conventions, there are opportunities to learn from authors who are more experienced and established than you are, so that you can learn what are they doing that I can start doing to make myself more established and successful. And then there are people in the industry, like editors and publishers, that you can meet, and they can help you get to the next level with your career, whether it's you form a relationship at a networking party with an editor that's like, yeah, I love what your stories are all about. I'd love to be a part of that. And then they become your official editor. Maybe you meet a publisher or a literary agent at a convention and they're like, hey, I really like you and I really like, what your stories are about. Here's my card. Feel free to send me your next manuscript. I want to look at it. And if they do that, that means you get to cut through the red tape of the slush pile, that you don't have to do the cold submission. They already know who you are, so they're going to look for your email. They're probably even going to give you a different email to send it to, like their personal, email rather than just the official submissions email. So you get to bypass all that red tape and they're going to look at your stuff. So you're going to get an answer back faster. And if your manuscript is good and it's a good fit for them, you're far less likely to get rejected. So again, huge benefit to meeting people in the industry face to face at these kind of conventions. And while, yeah, that's not going to directly get you any money, but it's potentially going to get your foot in the door with a publisher you've been really wanting to publish under, or potentially getting a literary agent. All of these things are possibilities with attending conventions like this. Obviously, you're going to have way more opportunities for literally all of the above if you do the big conventions like Gen Con and Dragon Con and whatever, because it's just more people equals more opportunities. But that also means there's more people you have to compete with for attention too. So keep that in mind. Bigger doesn't always necessarily mean better. Also, the bigger conventions cost way more, and because they're bigger, there's going to be way more vendors that you're going to have to compete with for attention from the attendees. And then also, at the bigger conventions, you have to pay a premium. So the booths that are closest to the door that all of the attendees are going to have to go past before they can get to the booths in the back, that costs more money. A lot of those booths that are at the front of a convention cost thousands of dollars. Whereas, yeah, there's booths available at the back of the convention that are far cheaper, but you're not going to get much foot traffic. Because of the logistics of, if any of y'all have ever been to a big convention like Gen Con or ACEN or whatever, they're massive. And there is literal exhaustion. Like, there is only so much walking around attendees can physically do at a convention. There are only so many booths they can look at before their brain is just like, I can't care anymore. I can't comprehend what I'm looking at anymore. And if you're all the way at the back wall, likely you're going to get way fewer people coming by your booth. And even those people that come by your booth are really not going to be as interested because they're going to be both physically and mentally exhausted. And they're not going to have as much patience to listen to your pitch. So keep that in mind also. With bigger conventions are not necessarily better, in that if you're not at the point where you can afford to pay for a more premium spot in the vendor hall, it's probably not worth it, because you're not even going to get the foot traffic you really need in order to make that cost worth it. In fact, I know several author friends of mine where if they can't get a group together in order to afford a bigger, better booth space at a big event like that, they'll just go as an attendee so that they can do all the networking stuff, but they're not going to add on the cost of actually vending at the convention because it's just too expensive. So do keep that in mind, that you don't necessarily have to vend at every event that you attend, but again, you have to weigh that value. What are you getting out of attending this convention? And make sure that you're thinking about that before signing up. Don't just do an event just to do an event. If you want to do it just for funsies, as just I'm just going as an attendee to have a fun time, absolutely, go you. But if you're doing this from a business perspective, don't just attend an event just to attend an event. Make sure that you know what the event's about. Make sure you have goals set in place when you go to the event so that then you can get some sort of value out of it. So keeping all of that in mind, that's how you're going to offset this very scary cost of upfront costs that it costs to do a convention, with balancing all these kinds of values, whether monetary or building your brand, that are all about helping you to become a successful author. Also, balancing these values along with the upfront cost is also a good way to determine what your overall con circuit is. How many conventions can you afford to do in a year? How many conventions does it make sense for you to do in a year? I've pulled back in that 2018 and 2019, I was going to as many events and conventions as I could manage. And a big part of that was I was trying to learn, okay, this event doesn't work for me. This event works for me. I went through tons of events that I'll never attend ever again because they just didn't work for me. And so that helped me to narrow down, okay, what are events and conventions that I get value out of that make sense for me to have on my con circuit? So while yes, today I only go to a fraction of the events and conventions that I used to, but that's because I've determined these are the ones I actually get value out of. As well as, we're still coming out of the pandemic. People are still, gaining their financial feet. And it's been hard the past few years to get people to open their wallets and spend money. So we're still all struggling with all of that. So we're still all building back up to adding more to our con circuit, in that you don't want to have a whole bunch of events on your con circuit if people aren't willing to buy things. No matter how good the convention is or whatever, if people aren't able to open their wallets, it doesn't really do us that much good. So keeping all of that in mind, that we're still working up to people also being financially capable of being patrons and buying your books. I know this is a lot of information to keep in mind, and this video definitely is paired with other videos that I've made about how to attend a convention as an author, as a panelist, as a vendor. Please be sure to go check those out. The links are below in the description. Make sure you watch those as well, because a lot of this will also make more sense if you watch those videos too. There's just so much that goes into working a convention as an author and selling your books, and it is just so important, and it's going to save you so much time, effort, and money if you plan out all this stuff in advance. I hope this video was helpful, and if you liked it, please be sure to give it a like, and if you're new, subscribe. All right, y'all, thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.